to reiterate what Father Kevin was saying yesterday, that Ignatius ends up in Manresa after the incident with the Moor. And during that time, he enters into severe penances and, changes his appearance so that he's a lot more wild looking in order to counteract the effect of vainglory in his life, because he recognizes that that's one of the primary obstacles that he has to face in wanting to serve God. And he does that in a somewhat extreme manner. And I think what I want to focus on now with that is that it's not the desire he had to counteract vainglory that was extreme. It wasn't his recognition that this was a real serious obstacle that had to be confronted if he was going to follow the path of Jesus. It was rather the means that he chose. He chose means that were external in order to somehow affect an internal change. And that he would learn is something that is very difficult to do. It's not that one doesn't need to have external activities that do have an impact on one's spiritual life. He would write in the exercises about fasting, about keeping vigils, about working against oneself in order to be as obedient and as pliable in the very hands of God. Now, he was certain that that was important, but he also knew that there was a way in which one could become so focused on the fasting or the vigils or the external actions that one was giving oneself kind of license to ignore what was happening within one. And what was most important to him, and which he referred to many, many times, is that the person be open to whatever God wants and be able to say yes to God. If these external actions helped in that way, then he could say, okay, do them within some sort of moderation. But if they became an end in themselves, there was a problem. For us nowadays, there's not much of a calling to do external things like fasting and vigils, taking on penances too much. We could probably do a lot more of that without the least bit being extreme. But what is always important is that we pay attention to what's going inside of us, because when we are not 100% pliable for the will of God, when we're not just open and wanting to listen to the Lord and let the Lord speak to our hearts, that's when things like vainglory and other obstacles to the spiritual life can remain and make things so much more difficult for us and for God to change us in the beautiful ways that God wants us to change. And so from this particular story of the extremes that St. Ignatius went to, I think we can draw a couple of things. We can look at his extremes and say, perhaps, not going nearly as far as that, I need to perhaps bring some penances against the obstacles that I have, to keep me from following God, within great moderation. But the second thing we can say is pay attention deeply to what's going on inside of us and identify those things that keep us, that are obstacles to our relationship with God, and pray for the grace and allow God to show us how we can confront, combat, change, and be converted so that we can be that pliable instrument in the hands of God to do the wonderful will of God that God has for us. And that's the wisdom from the Autobiography of St. Ignatius.